Barbados's primary energy requirements are met almost entirely through the use of fossil fuel resources, most of which are imported. Oil-derived products contribute an overwhelming portion of these primary energy requirements, making up 97.4% of the total energy consumption, approximately 90% of which is imported and 10% is produced domestically. Barbados spent an average of $599.2 million per year during the period 2007 to 2016 on fuel imports, representing over 7% of the gross domestic product, a level comparable to government's expenditure on education, with a significant negative impact on direct production costs and therefore on the competitiveness of the Barbados economy. The cost of importation of petroleum products peaked in 2014 at a value of $877.5 million. The fuel import bill for 2018 stood at $513 million. You can see we're talking about massive amounts here. Electricity sold to the grid from renewable energy sources during 2018 stood at 44,089,032 kilowatt hours, or 4.7% of the total electricity sold to the grid. This represented total savings of about $10 million for 2018. It is necessary to accelerate this process of connecting renewable energy systems to the grid to reduce the importation of fossil fuels and to help drive the cost of electricity down. On May 24, 2018, a new Barbados Labour Party government took office, and in so doing announced a policy target to transition Barbados to be the first 100% renewable energy and carbon neutral state in the world by 2030. And since we've announced that, a lot of other countries have risen to that challenge and are trying to meet the same 2030 deadline. They don't want Barbados to get there first, but we will get there. The Barbados National Energy Policy 2019 to 2030 and its implementation plan were approved by the Cabinet of Barbados at its meeting held on March 28, 2019. The policy addresses all the major aspects of the energy sector and provided a framework for moving the country from a fossil fuel-based economy to one based entirely on renewable energy sources. The ambitious policy target of 100% renewable energy has made it critical to establish a stable and predictable tariff for the generation of electricity from renewable energy sources to facilitate the expansion of the sustainable energy sector. The Renewable Energy Pricing Policy. The Renewable Energy Rider, RER, was introduced by the Barbados Light and Power and approved by the Fair Trading Commission in 2010. The Renewable Energy Rider allowed eligible customers with renewable energy generation systems to sell excess power to the grid. This rider was tied to the price of fuel via the Fuel Adjustment Clause and was considered unpredictable as a result of fluctuations in the payments for energy produced from renewable energy sources. So the amount you got rose or fell depending on the price of oil, which should really have no relation to the cost of renewable energy. Investors, as a consequence, found it exceedingly difficult to secure funding for their renewable energy projects when the price of fuel fell. This in turn led to high-risk premiums charged by banks financing any such investment. And obviously, this effectively ground the sector to a halt. In July of 2016, the FTC reviewed the Renewable Energy Rider and decided to replace the rider with more stable tariffs for electricity from solar and wind of 41.6 cents and 31.5 cents respectively. These tariffs, however, were temporary in nature. The Ministry of Energy and Water Resources sought to design a policy framework which guaranteed a stable and permanent price for electricity from renewable energy sources by allowing low-risk investments, low interest rates, guaranteeing fair returns for investors, and lower fuel prices for the average Barbadian electricity consumer. Consequently, the Energy Division in 2016 developed terms of reference to commission a consultant to develop a pricing policy relating to electricity generation from renewable energy sources. The consultant was commissioned and engaged stakeholders in several rounds of discussions, including a town hall meeting. Coming out of the analysis, it was concluded that a well-tailored feed-in tariff system with specific features was the most prudent policy to be able to meet all the important objectives. But energy is dynamic. The same things that inform the energy sector now are not the same things that inform the energy sector 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago. The cost of technology is starting to drop quickly. Battery storage is now becoming the dominant word and a major consideration in energy, whereas it wasn't 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. So our whole outlook has to change. So what would have informed our plans for our pricing policy 5 years ago and even 3 years ago are not the same things that need to inform it now. Technology and the sector has taken tremendous leaps over the last couple of years. So the Ministry of Energy was faced with a bit of a dilemma. Do we attempt to set a pricing policy that is based on a study done years ago? And to be honest with you, the Fair Trading Commission had some issues with it as well. And we thought it prudent, and this is when things work together for good. Various departments of government and arms of government have to work together to push the important sectors forward. It cannot be operating in silos. We have to work with the Ministry of Small Business. We have to work with the FTC. The FTC has to work with us. We all have to work with the stakeholders, and we all have to work with the public of Barbados to make this thing succeed. We cannot get to 100% renewable energy by 2030 without the buy-in of the whole of Barbados. So the decision was taken to engage those in the sector. We held a stakeholders meeting with all of the major players in the renewable energy sector on November 28th, 2018. And the stakeholders agreed to net billing, which is sale of excess electricity for systems 3 kilowatts or less. They also agreed to a feed-in tariff system for renewable energy systems of 1 megawatt or less. And we agreed that another stakeholder meeting will be held to discuss a pricing mechanism for systems over 1 megawatt. On March 12, 2019, in what I call one of the greatest instances of cooperation between the Ministry and the FTC, the Ministry met with the Ministry of Small Business, Entrepreneurship and Commerce and the Fair Trading Commission to discuss the proposals for the pricing policy of renewable energy systems connected to the grid. The proposals coming out of this meeting led to the submission of a paper to Cabinet. And there was give and take on both sides. The agreement was that the FTC would do further investigations. They were set a strict timeline to do the investigations, and we would use those investigations along with what else we had on the table to come up once and for all with the best pricing policy and methodology and tariff rates or whatever rates that we intend will take the sector forward. The initial study had focused entirely on feed-in tariffs. The FTC was of the opinion, as was I, that we can't just lock our minds to one methodology with a dynamic sector. We had to consider all the methodologies. We had to consider feed-in tariffs. We had to consider auctions. We had to consider combinations of both. And it was best to do this after a comprehensive study. Then we compare the two studies. We may not end up going fully with one or the other. We may end up with a hybrid, but whatever we end up with will be what, between the Ministry of Energy and Water Resources and the FTC and all the players concerned, that we genuinely believe is the proper fit for Barbados. The Cabinet at its meeting on April 4th, 2019 agreed to the following. By July 6, 2019, the FTC should set rates for electricity supply from renewable energy sources for systems up to 1 megawatt using feed-in tariffs, but will not be constrained by this methodology for setting the pricing for systems over 1 megawatt. All commissioned systems of 500 kilowatts or less and the licenses issued for these systems as of July 6, 2019 should be ring-fenced at the current rates for 20 years. A capacity limit of 10 additional megawatts for new systems installed and licenses awarded for systems of 500 kilowatts or less should be approved by the Minister of Energy and Water Resources, subject to consultation with the Barbados Light and Power Company for this interim period up to July 6, 2019. It is expected that the above decisions will provide the degree of comfort and confidence to investors by eliminating uncertainty as it relates to pricing and aid in the rapid recovery of this sector. Now, in English, because the current rates for the feed-in tariffs were temporary, people found it difficult to get loans based on temporary rates. Nobody wants to lend on an uncertainty, especially when your pricing could be subject to change. So I may lend you, the bank, may lend you money expecting you to get a certain return. And a couple years down the line, or maybe a year down the line, that return drastically falls. So that uncertainty actually resulted in much higher interest rates by the banks in order to protect their investment. So it became difficult for potential investors to get the funding and financing they needed to push RE systems. By fixing the existing rates for 20 years, we have protected those who took the risk in the early days to invest, and we also expect that that is going to spark those who have been waiting and hoping, so that between now and July 6 this year, we expect to see a plethora of license applications for people willing to take advantage of this rate that is fixed now for 20 years, the certainty that we've brought into it. We also accept that this is based on the information that we currently have. We've deemed it necessary to do a new study and to find out what the appropriate rate should be. So as not to flood the grid entirely, we've capped the licenses that will benefit from this to 10 megawatts, and you have to have been approved for your license before the 6th of July. Now, this is a good thing. A lot of the investors have been complaining. You've heard the Williamses complaining. You've heard everybody complaining that because we had no fixed price and nothing that was bankable that they could take to the bank as a certainty, that it became very, very difficult to actually grow this sector. For us to get to the 100% renewable energy target by 2030, our sector can't grow incrementally. We require nothing less than a tectonic shift to get there. It has to be a radical transformation. So this is our good faith gesture to people. We're giving you a bounty between now and July 6. Take advantage of it. Let us get 10 megawatts, 10 new megawatts on the grid, and then let us look at what the proper mix for Barbados is going to be past that. This has met with the approval of the FTC. It has met with the approval of the stakeholders, and it has met with the approval of the other related ministries that have an input or concern with the energy sector. So we just want people to know the door is open. Send in your applications. There's certainty. You can now take it to the bank, and we fully expect that this will kickstart the sector and catapult us to where it is that we want to go to get to 100% RE and a carbon neutral Barbados by 2030. Thank you.